Honourable Todd McClay.
Mr Chair, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to take a call at this stage in the bill and certainly happy to provide some clarification and answer a few of the questions that Darian Fenton raised. Can I start, though, by Mr Chair, by saying that, in particular, this part of the bill is where most of the change in the tax system held in this bill will take place. And I'm pleased to hear that the opposition is supporting it, because this is about fairness both to those taxpayers that will be provided greater clarity and in some cases not need to pay tax where they were currently, but it also provides fairness to other New Zealand taxpayers who now will be sure that everybody is paying their fair share of tax. David Clark, I thank him for his contribution. His heart didn't quite seem in it, though, because I know he's very supportive of this part of the bill, but I guess, Mr Chair, when one is in the opposition, one needs to oppose more than they support. At least the votes will be on the right side of the ledger when it comes time to vote on this bill. Mr Chair, just a couple of points here for Darian Fenton and for others around accommodation. So largely the tax system says that when one earns income, one must pay income tax on it. And if you receive something in kind instead of a cash payment in lieu of the income you would have earned, then that is also taxable. So if somebody earns a set amount every week, but an employer says, well, you can have accommodation and I'll pay you a little bit less, and you'll be better off because you don't have to pay, you won't be declaring the accommodation because I'm giving it to you rather than cash and charging you for it, then you won't pay tax on it. Well, that may be of benefit to that worker, but all other workers that aren't in that situation where they just receive their wages and have to pay tax on it, when they go home and they pay their mortgage or they pay their rent, they're paying from the position of using money that's already taxed. So what we do, Mr Chair, is say that when you look at all of the income that you earn, be it cash that's received weekly or fortnightly or other things that are given in kind, instead of receiving that cash payment, it is treated as if it was cash. You must be taxed. And that's fair to taxpayers, as Ms Fenton has said, who may not receive some of these benefits, although I'm not sure they will always be benefits, but will not always receive these benefits that some other workers or taxpayers will. The challenge we have, though, is what happens if you are living in a house, you're receiving a wage, you're paying tax on it, and then you're paying your rent from income that has been taxed, and your employer says, we need you to go away for 6 months and work away from your home. Well, you would have two places of work, and therefore you would have to pay tax twice. Or your employer says, I'm sending you away for 6 months, I will meet the cost there. Well, we don't want to double tax that person because they still have their home that they're paying for. They often will have their family there. So what we're doing with this bill is providing clarification that if they're away for up to 2 years, if the employer is providing them an accommodation benefit and it's to meet the actual cost of accommodation, no more than that, then that won't be taxed, because we don't want to tax them twice. That would be unfair to them. The reason we've said 2 years is that's a reasonable period of time, enough flexibility so that the employers and employees won't be overburdened with having to deal with the tax system, and that we also believe that after 2 years, if you're still away working, coming back on the odd weekend, well, actually at that point your relationship of where you're based, where you work, has probably changed, and therefore, to be fair to other taxpayers, there could or should be a tax implication there. But we've also recognised that there will be situations where maybe somebody does need to be away for more than 2 years, and if it's a special project, that can be up to 3 years. This would change during that period of time if you move your family and that becomes your new place of residence, or you actually say, I'm living here now, not in the last place. Well, then actually the amount, your situation would change and you would be taxed on that, and it's an obligation the employer has. We've also recognised the great challenges in Canterbury, and that this is a unique and different situation, very difficult, and we've put in place some rules that say up to 5 years workers who are involved in the rebuild in Canterbury can be tax exempt for their accommodation. It steps down in a period of time. So, pardon me? So that's anybody that will be in Canterbury for the rebuild purposes. Not if you're there selling a car, but if you're part of the rebuild, anybody employed there will be availed of this. Where it's slightly different, though, is the RSE scheme which was raised. And somebody that comes to New Zealand on an RSE scheme will have a place to reside and work from. And, Mr Chair. Mr. Chair, and that is their place of residence whilst they're in New Zealand. And as with any other taxpayer in New Zealand, if they are receiving money, if they are receiving accommodation instead of income, it must be taxed. But in this case, if they then have to move down the road to work and there's overnight accommodation, they put them in a motel, they say they have to go for a conference. I know they wouldn't, but it's the same principle. We wouldn't expect them to be taxed twice to pay, in that case, if the employer is providing them with a benefit. They're not earning extra income, they're just having some of their costs met. When it comes, Mr. Chair, to valuation, very fair. We've said it's a fair rental value. So we don't want Inland Revenue to overestimate or the taxpayer or their employer to underestimate. We want to strike a balance which is fair to all taxpayers, and I believe that's been done. Two other changes, particularly a specific valuation rules for ministers of religion. They have relied upon an accommodation or an agreement with Inland Revenue for many years. We have decided to take any certainty away and to put that into law to codify it for them. And we also have provided clarification for the New Zealand Defence Force. When it comes to meal payments, if you are provided with meals or you're provided with an allowance for meals up to 3 months because of work-related travel or something else that's different, that's tax exempt. Thereafterwards it wouldn't be. And the reason for this is if you are at a conference and you have to have a meal, well, we wouldn't expect you to pop home and make your lunch, but actually after 3 months I think that is fairly reasonable. When it comes to clothing, Inland Revenue and the Tax Act is interested in the tax situation. So whether or not an allowance is provided is secondary. If it is, we now have rules or clearer rules that will decide where taxation is appropriate and where it isn't. And primarily if you are provided with an allowance or a uniform for that allowance, then actually that's part of the nature of your work and you're not taxed on that. It's a tax-free allowance. There are some exceptions to this though, and certainly the case where somebody is provided with an allowance for plain clothes where they might also have a uniform. Well, they have the uniform, they're tax exempt for that, but they're provided with an allowance for a plain clothing allowance. Well, previously there has been uncertainty that if you have a uniform and receive funds for other clothing, it should be taxed. But there will be situations, including the New Zealand Police Force, where I think that's not appropriate. So we're providing clarification there so that only those that should be paying tax will be. Final point I want to raise, Mr. Chair, is around the deregistration of charities. There has been a lot of confusion. This too is about providing certainty to charities so they know their obligations should they be deregistered, choose to be deregistered or are deregistered because they no longer are of charitable purpose. And this really goes to what those obligations are, and primarily the most important thing for other taxpayers is if there are a number of assets that have been acquired by that charity who had a tax-free status and they are no longer a charity, what happens to those assets? Well, simply they either have to be passed to another charity or tax must be paid on them. And so this just clarifies that. Mr. Chair, this is an important part of the bill. It is extremely taxpayer friendly. In many cases reduces red tape and compliance, but in providing certainty it also provides fairness to those who are to avail themselves of some of these tax concessions, but equally it is also fair to taxpayers who won't, so they can be sure that only those who are receiving these allowances are doing so specifically because it's different than their everyday life, and where it isn't, we expect them to pay tax and they will be paying tax. Thank you.
Andrew Little.
I just want to comment on two aspects of Part 2 of the taxation